Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today I am going to be talking about Sunbringer by Hannah Kanner, book 2 of the Fallen Gods trilogy. And this is going to be one of those books where I can talk about it more in the things that I didn't like about it, more than I can the things that I did like about it. It's just one of those times where, while I did enjoy the book, I ended up giving it a 3-star rating. So it was pretty middle of the road, pretty good. I didn't hate it, I didn't love it. It was just, somewhere in there, a decent fantasy read. But it's just a lot easier for me to talk about the nitpicks I have than the positives, which is, it just happens sometimes with a book. I do want to commend this book for the ability to have a wide, diverse cast of characters. And I don't just mean where they're from and what they look like. I mean their sexuality and their abledness. There are several characters in this book that have different disabilities, and I think it fits well into the story. If you're the kind of person who likes to see that kind of thing included in your book, this is something I'm going to highly recommend to you. God Killer, obviously being the first one, is super good and has these same kind of elements in it, and I think it is just, one of those things that Hannah Kanner has done that sets this book a little bit apart from some other fantasy series where she does put an emphasis on highlighting different aspects of the world. And, a lot of times I think authors probably struggle with how they would fit a character into here. I know Sanderson has a character who's in a wheelchair, and that's great, but Hannah Kanner is able to have a wide variety of people with different abilities and sexualities and just kind of weave them into the story in a way that, to me, didn't really feel like heavy-handed. I could see how if you're not somebody who enjoys seeing these things presented in a book, it's going to feel very heavy-handed and you're not going to like it. But for me, I think it just felt like it was part of the story. Everything made sense, and it was nice to see somebody really put effort into including all of these different kinds of aspects into a story. With that nice thing being said, I do think that this book could have been probably about 100 pages shorter. There are definitely points throughout it that felt like it dragged, and it really did feel like a middle book. This book is a lot of dealing with the consequences from the first book and then setting up actions for the third book in the series, which, middle book syndrome is definitely a thing. It's not always the case, but this is one of the cases where it is very much true. So before we get any further into this, let me tell you a little bit about what this book is about. And like I said, we are dealing with the fallout from the last book. This book basically picks up right after the ending of God Killer. So you have the separation of our party. Not everybody is together anymore. And then we are dealing with the fallout, like I said. So we have the brink of war kind of being put onto the doorstep. We have to deal with what we learned about the king in the last book and just all of those things that are coming together. And it all comes to a head in one specific city. I will say that this book is very much backloaded. The earlier, I'll say 75% of this book is what I really felt like was the middle book syndrome part of it. It's slow, it's meandering, there's not a lot happening in a plot sense. There is definitely like some character development that happens that I think is very well done. But all of these big reveals and like these huge things that are happening all happen at the end. So it is a very backloaded book. And with all that being said, I am definitely very much looking forward to the third one. I really think there are a lot of awesome things that Hannah Kanner is going to be able to pay off in that last book that were set up here. So while this is definitely a stepping stone book, I really am looking forward to the third one. I think it has the opportunity to conclude the series in a very pleasurable way. So now let me just talk about some other aspects of the story. First, I'll go ahead and start with the prose. And I will say the prose of this story to me is nothing really special. I think it is very easy to follow and it flows well and everything, but it's not really a plus or a minus. The writing is there. Obviously, I'm not the best person to talk about prose, but when it is good to me, I do notice it. I'm thinking of a Ernest Hemingway, a Janny Wirtz. Like those are the kind of authors, in Erickson, those are the kind of authors where some of their prose I really feel like can help elevate a story. Janny Wirtz in particular, her prose is just blows my mind sometimes with like her command of the English language. It's next level. That's not what's here, and I don't think it's supposed to be. I think this is more of a Sanderson approach of where the prose is not trying to get involved in the story at all. It is just there, and it is to get you through the story. The world / the magic system, normally I would try to separate these two things, but in this case, with it being such a fantasy story, that the magic is so related to the world itself, because in this world, there are gods for everything. There's a god for white lies, there's gods for rivers, for stories, for river, I think I said rivers already, but for the wind. I mean, there are gods for everything, the sea, and I really think that the world and the magic system are so intertwined that I have to talk about them together, and that is one thing I did really enjoy. We got some expansion of that. We're seeing some of the ramifications of the god killing that was more of a focus in the first book than this one, and we're seeing what it takes for those kinds of changes to happen and the ramifications that are coming from it. And I found it to be really interesting. And from the world aspect, we are seeing more and more of it. While it is still a pretty isolated story, I do mention that most of this book ends up taking place in one city for most of our characters. The world did feel expanded because there are outside pressures now coming into the fold that I found to be pretty well done. Okay, and now let's go ahead and talk about the characters. I'm going to talk about some of them individually. So Kissen was my favorite character and still is my favorite character. And unfortunately in this book, I feel like she kind of takes a back seat because of the separation from her and the rest of the group. There are some things that she's doing without by herself that, man, it just felt like it was unneeded. I almost feel like you could have not had her in a lot of this book except for some very key moments. And that's what makes it hard for her because her key moments are so important to the overall plot and the story. There are two major reveals and we end up getting through Kissen that obviously you needed. And we needed a way for her to get there. So it makes sense, but unfortunately she felt so sidelined. And I think one big problem that I had just overall in this book is I enjoyed all of these characters together. And in the first book, we have that, Lord of the Ring-esque party comes together and we go travel. And in this book, we have that same trope of, well, now the party is ripped apart and they're doing their own individual things. And unfortunately, I think the group is much stronger together from my enjoyment. So I very much wanted them to just be together the whole time. There are plenty of times where I was just reading and wanting Kissen to be with Elo and Inara/Skedi because I kind of think of them as one character. And I guess I just kind of wanted to see her not be so handicapped because she is very much handicapped, and it felt like, I don't want to say her agency was taken away, but she really had to not just rely on herself in the way that, I don't know, I kind of wanted her to be that force that I think of her as. And, it definitely some character growth, definitely, like I said, major reveals come through her, but it definitely wasn't my favorite thing. And honestly, in general, the characters were probably my biggest problem I had with this book, because then moving on to Elo, you have this awakening of his fighting spirit again. He is no longer that baker who, ran away after everything that happened in Bloodraven. You have him being a force, which was really cool to see, but it also just felt so different. It felt like somebody who had put something behind them that was now bringing it back out into the forefront. And I don't think he handled a lot of things in the best way, which is, an acceptable way. He doesn't need to be a perfect person. But once again, I didn't really love anything he was doing. There were some times where he just felt like such a different character to the character that I knew that it was hard to accept the actions he was taking. And then we have to talk about Inara/Skedi. So there are, once again, major things that are revealed and explored through them in sense of the world as a whole. There are major things that we learn about Inara and Skedi and, all kinds of really fun, interesting answers to questions that I had. Now, unfortunately, Inara multiple times acts like a child, which makes sense. She is a child, but unfortunately sometimes it just doesn't work for me when I'm reading a book when a child acts like a child, which is not fair to the character themselves. But I'm a 28-year-old guy. Sometimes it's hard for me to relate to, I forget exactly how old she is, but there are just some decisions she makes that are so rash, and I understand she's trying to push forward and just understand life and the things that are going on, but for me, she grated on me several times throughout the book. I will also say there are supposed to be some very emotional moments between her and Skedi that I think the resolution or whatever was happening between them happened so fast. It's like we didn't even get a chance to breathe and understand the impact of what was maybe supposed to be happening. I have a very specific example in my head that's a massive spoiler that I can't say, without ruining the book. But that was another thing that just kind of showed me that the characters weren't the way I wanted them to be, which, is fine. Not every character is going to be for you, but it is something that definitely grated on me. And then, I kind of already harped on this a little bit with this being a middle book, but the plot in this book is very much lacking. Like I said, there are major reveals that are super important and I think are really going to pay off in the next book. But for this book in particular, it's a lot of getting people to the places we need, setting up a few key things to happen to spark our inciting incident really for the next book. And then so much of it is backloaded that it happens so quickly that it just, I don't know, the plot just didn't really work for me. And I think part of it is because so much of it just felt mundane and just, I don't know. Like I said, this book felt like 100 pages too long, and it's not even a very long book. I think it's only 400 pages. But I think if we had trimmed some of the stuff away that I didn't like personally. Obviously, if we took away the parts I didn't like, I would like it more. But I feel like there were just some incidents of it being longer than it needed to be, focusing on things for a little bit longer than they needed to be focused on, and not really getting anywhere. Obviously, we get to an interesting place at the very end, but it all just felt like stepping stones for the next book, which is where the middle book syndrome tag gets put here. So with all that being said, I am very much looking forward to the third and final book. I believe this is supposed to just be a trilogy, so I am very much looking forward to that. It'll be a month one read for me. I won't say day one because who knows what my reading schedule will be at the time, but within a month of it coming out, it'll definitely be a book I am looking into. But if you have read Sunbringer, let me know what you think. If you're thinking of picking up the series, I still highly recommend that you do. Godkiller is really, really good. This is still a good book, and I think whatever the final book that I believe she's done writing, it is going to be fantastic. There's a lot of opportunities in this world, and I think it's just going to be great. So let me know any of your thoughts down below in the comments, and as always, have a good one.